Welcome into Boxing Scene's top stories here on ProBox TV. Download the ProBox TV app. Never fall behind in your boxing news. Well, it is the end of the year. That means we're going over the top stories of 2024. And one of the top stories is a huge division that was absolutely outstanding and is packed with talent. I'm talking about the junior middleweights, 154 pounds. Anytime you have the pound for pound king and you're not sure if he's the number one guy, that means you have a great division. To help me break it down, Jimmy Smith in studio alongside the champs, Chris Algieri, Paulie Malignaggi. Chris, you got to start out with Terrence Crawford. He is number one. He is at 154 pounds. We don't know what his future is. He's talked about wanting to fight Canelo or he might retire. Does his continuation at 154 define how the division rises in 2025?
Yeah, I mean, with Crawford, he's kind of one of the new guys in the division, right? He's only had one fight at 154. He was obviously undefeated at 147, 140, was a lightweight world champion, Hall of Fame career, first ballot Hall of Famer coming, living legend at this point, moves up to 54, and, takes on Madrimov, who's a fantastic fighter, and really showed his level in that fight against Crawford, making a very, very tight, very, very close fight that Crawford edged out. A lot of people argue that Crawford actually lost that fight. A lot of people thought that he got by. So that's one for debate. But in terms of who's the top of this division, of course it's Crawford. He's the guy. He's so good he can step into a division and immediately become the king. I look at him as almost being above the division at this point in terms of being a titleist or being undisputed. It doesn't really matter. He's such a big star and he's such a dangerous guy. And actually he beat Madrimov, who honestly might be number two in the division, even though this division is so deep and it's so thick with talent. You've got Sergey Bohocek, who just lost a razor-close thin decision to Virgil Ortiz, who is super highly touted, was a major prospect at 147, has recently moved up to 54. Had a couple fights, a bunch of first-round knockouts in a row, but then meets Sergey Bohocek. Bohocek shows his class. Again, very arguable decision depending on how you had that fight scored. A lot of people had Ortiz, a lot of people had Bohocek, some people had it a draw. Very, very tightly contested fight. And I think in terms of how talented this division is, I think a lot of these matchups are going to end up that way. And you're going to have a lot of guys where the boxing math doesn't add up. Well, I beat this guy, but then this guy beat me, and then you're going to be going back and forth that way because everyone's so good. Tim Tszyu, who is looking like he could be a potential future star and maybe a guy who could take over this whole division, is now 0-2. He takes a very hard loss to Fondora, which started with a nasty elbow clash that split his head, gave me one of the worst, bloodiest fights I've ever seen, worst cuts I've ever seen in a fight. Tszyu battled through it like a warrior, but ended up losing a very, very close decision, which made Fondora a unified champion. He had 2 belts now. Then, coming back, he fights relatively unknown and unheralded Murtaza Aliyev, who turns out to be an absolute monster and destroys Tszyu in just a handful of rounds and comes onto the scene as a major player now. Undefeated power puncher with big size, big reach, and dangerous hands, left and right hands. He can really punch. So this division, and then you've got the next row of guys. You've got the Charles Cromwells of the world, who hasn't gotten a whole lot of light, hasn't got a big platform, but is super talented. I would like to see it match up with any one of these guys. One of the quote-unquote older guys in the division, Errol Spence, a guy who was obviously a unified champion at 147, lost to Crawford a couple years ago, but now is back up fighting at 54. Seems like he's going to be fighting Fondora. Regardless of what level Spence is at, it's still Errol Spence. He's still a fantastic fighter. Another guy who is a top of the sport, top flight contender, and someone that's extremely popular, puts butts in seats. So this division's got everything you could ever ask for. You've got talented guys that are willing to fight each other. You've got champions. You've got guys who are hungry on the way up. And again, just like I said, we got these guys are actually fighting each other. It's almost like a throwback division at this point. Super deep, tons of talent. Love to see how this thing is going to pan out. And like I said, I think these guys are actually going to fight each other, which is exactly what the sport needs.
Right. Well, Terrence Crawford, the only star who can kind of pick his spot. To your point, Chris, a lot of them don't have necessarily the name value for the casual fan that they don't need to fight one another. That being the case, Paulie, who do you think we're talking about at the end of 2025 when it comes to 154 pounds? Remember, Jaron Ennis might move up to 154 at some point. What name do you think we're talking about end of next year, provided these guys do fight one another and trim the fat?
I think if they fight each other,
yeah,
I'm not sure you're going to have one guy that's going to stand out. Like the champ was saying, the boxing math never adds up in a weight class like this. There's too many talented guys that one guy might knock off another guy but lose to another guy. But then the guy that got beat by that guy might beat the guy who beat the other guy, so on and so forth. I mean, it's confusing just to talk about it. But I think, this is actually one of those weight classes where you got to count your lucky stars that it's got fighters that are wanting to fight each other. I think with the exception of maybe a Bud Crawford who has earned the right to sort of pick and choose. And I'm not being hypocritical here because again, when people might say, "Oh, you know what, Canelo, how he's earned that right." No, Canelo hasn't. He got all the belts. Canelo has all the belts, and he prevents anybody in the top from fighting for them. While at 154, Bud has a BA title. He's considering whether he's even going to fight again, and if he doesn't, he'll just retire. But could you imagine the backlash if Crawford, out of all these names, decides to fight like a Charles Conwell, who is a good fighter, champ? You mentioned Charles Conwell was a good fighter, but with all these other guys in the weight class, Bud decides he's going to defend the title against Charles Conwell. You know what I mean? Like it would be an uproar, wouldn't it? So that's what I mean about the double standard in boxing.
Or even worse, a rematch with Spence, which is
Yeah, for
possible.
example, yeah. No.
Yeah, exactly. So the standard has to stay the same here. What I love about this weight class is, aside from Crawford, guys have to fight each other and they want to fight each other. You have what do you have? You have a bunch of Russians or a bunch of former Soviets and Virgil Ortiz, who is a throwback
monster. Yep.
Mexican American style fighter. These are the mentality of these kind of fighters is to go for it, to go fight each other, to go get it. And so was Crawford. Honestly, Crawford his whole career has always chased the toughest fights. It's just at this point, you can't blame him for now wanting to be able to nitpick a little bit. But it's a weight class that's very, very open. It's a weight class that you can't really see who's going to be at the top of it by the end of the year, because also, politics get in the way. Who is going to fight each other? Guys, they all want to fight each other, but who is going to fight one another in this weight class? You look at what the difference with Fundora and Zoo, and then what Mataz Aliyev did to Zoo. You could see Mataz Aliyev mowing through Fundora like a hot knife through butter, and then he'd have 3 of the 4 belts, right? But does that fight even get made? Probably not. So you have a weight class where everybody wants to fight each other, but still, there's things that are going to get in the way that they may not fight each other. Ortiz and Madrimov is going to be an excellent, excellent fight. And, as was Ortiz and Bohachuk. Ortiz came on a string of first-round knockouts, and, we were all waiting for him to step up. And when he does step up, look at what he's doing. He stepped up. He didn't get scared away. That Bohachuk fight didn't scare him, that he had to get up off the canvas twice. That Bohachuk fight actually invigorated him even more, and he's jumping right back into the mix and fighting Madrimov, who I think is a super, super dangerous fight, and is not, could possibly beat him, But this is the mindset of this weight class. This is what makes the weight class so fun. Give me a weight class like this any freaking time. I don't care for stars that want to fight cab drivers and just to appease their groupies. I want weight classes like this where you have top flight fighters who aren't even bona fide stars yet, but they're champions, and they don't care about, well, let me try to become a star first and fight a bunch of cab drivers, and then I'll become a star, and then maybe I'll take a chance. They don't have any of this mentality. Give me a weight class like this, 365 out of 365 days a year. Forget all the other stuff. This is what I want to see.
All right, Chris, I have one question for you before we move on. And that is, I'm showing my age here. I remember the Four Kings era, right? I remember Tommy Hearns, Roberto Duran, Sugar Ray Leonard, and Marvelous Marvin Hagler. But I remember which ones did commercials. I remember who sold 7-Up, and it was Sugar Ray Leonard. This idea of, Paulie just said
Right guard.
Right guard was Hagler. Right, this idea of the it factor that makes a casual fan know who you are. Not about talent, but that it factor. You think there's anybody there right now at 54 who could emerge, Chris? That's my question.
This is a tough question, Jimmy. Because,
that's what I do, bro.
Yeah, there's a lot there's a lot of talent. There's not a lot of star power. We've got those former Soviets, those Eastern European guys. They're not going to be able to do commercials here. Let's put it that way. They're English, if they even speak English. It's not going to be that great. I think Virgil Ortiz has a touch of it. Yep. He's actually very funny on Twitter. The way he quips at people, his responses. He's a well-spoken guy. He's well-mannered. He has the potential. He's young. He's good-looking. His fighting style is speaking of good-looking, his fighting style is very good-looking. He's got that ability too. Crawford, I just don't think he's long for this weight class or really the sport any longer. He's coming up as 37 or 38 years old, so it's not going to be that much. He's starting to break out of his shell a little bit, becoming a little more of having a crossover appeal. We're seeing him making appearances now, kind of being an ambassador to the sport, so to speak. But in terms of future stars in this division, it's tough, man. You got a lot of guys who can fight, but they're not here to talk. They're here to fight.
That's right. Because of Marvelous Marvin Hagler, I know that one cannot be malodorous around one's chums. That's right. Anyway, as they make news at 154 pounds, we'll bring it to you right here on ProBox TV. We all know it's going to be an incredibly deep weight class at the end of 2025. Who's on top? We'll let you know. For more ProBox TV, scan the QR code on the screen or go to the App Store and Google Play. ProBox TV, your boxing channel.